This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week, Katherine, Druckman, and I talk with Cooper Quintin of the EFF about how big and awful the stalking business is. It's not just the business, it's the people that want to follow other people. I mean, if you're worried about Google following you, what about the ex-spouse or the future ex-spouse that wants to spy on you? I mean, anybody with a motivation to spy on you there's a market for this, and it's easy to do. So, and he's fighting that with the lab at the threat lab at the EFF. We touch on so many topics. This is a really great show, and it is coming up next.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 752, recorded Wednesday, October 4th, 2023. Stalkers beware.
Listeners of this program get an ad-free version if they're members of Club TWiT. $7 a month gives you ad-free versions of all of our shows, plus membership in the Club TWiT Discord, a great clubhouse for TWiT listeners. And finally, the TWiT Plus feed, with shows like Stacy's Book Club, The Untitled Linux Show, The Giz Fizz, and more. Go to twit.tv/clubtwit. And thanks for your support.
Hello again, everybody, everywhere. I am Doc Searls, and this is FLOSS Weekly. I don't know if you can hear it here, but you can hear it, Katherine. Katherine's our co-host today. But somebody just started running a chainsaw or something not far from here.
And I'm actually being murdered.
I'm positioned down here. Yeah, somebody's being murdered. No, it's a wood chipper. This is, Okay. So how are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm doing pretty well. I'm pretty excited about today, by the way. I met Cooper at DEF CON. And, we had a short conversation and, no details because, Vegas and what happens and whatever. But I was like, we got to get this guy on FLOSS Weekly. Just, because. So anyway, so here we are. So I'm pretty excited about this.
So what happens in Vegas actually comes on the show, which is
It
cool.
comes on the show. We just, different topic of conversation. That's all.
So so how did you intersect at Vegas? What was
I can't tell you the detail. No, it was kind of random. It was, we know the same people, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Well, this is, I'm going to hurry up and get into the show because we're off, as always, to a little bit of a late start. So our guest is Cooper Quintin. He's a security researcher, senior public interest technologist with the EFF Threat Lab. He's on the board member of he is a board member of the Open Archive. His projects have included at least Privacy Badger, Canary Watch, and analysis of state-sponsored malware campaigns such as Dark Caracal, and I'm sure it gets longer than that, but that's what I copied into my thing here. So welcome to the show, Quintin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here. Pleasure to be here.
So how long have you been at the EFF?
So I have been with the EFF for 9 years now. I started out in 2014 working on Privacy Badger. Started developing Privacy Badger from its proof of concept state to alpha and beta and up to our first 1 million users. And then moved on from there to start looking at malware, state-sponsored malware targeting activists, journalists, human rights defenders, things like that. And now I co-run with my colleague Eva Galperin our Threat Lab project, which is looking at targeted digital threats to vulnerable populations. So we've looked at everything from, again, state-sponsored malware, cell site simulators, things like stalkerware and spouseware, which is, malware that is specifically targeted at like abusive partners to install on their victims' devices to keep track of them, and other things like that.
Well, I was thinking, when people do their vows for better or worse, a little ride there could be. I can make it a lot worse, actually. If I'm technically equipped for it, it's amazing how that goes. Is there a lot of that? The spousal abusey things that
yeah there is, unfortunately. It's like you were saying, right? any sort of abusive relationship is always really bad. It's a really bad and really scary situation, right? But when the abuser is also technically inclined, right, and especially if the person being abused is not, it can get even more scary, right? Like you might feel like your email is unsafe. You might, your devices might be spied on, and there's this entire market of malware specifically designed for people to spy on their spouses with. And a lot of it is marketed. Some of it is marketed as like to spy on your kids with, right?
Right. Yeah.
But it's also, a lot of it is also directly marketed as to spy on your spouses with, right? And it all does the same thing. It all, collects all of your emails and, not your emails. It collects all of your text messages and your pictures and your location, right? It can turn on your microphone, all of the things that high-end state-sponsored, mobile malware does, right? The only difference is that the way it gets installed, right? Like you're not using exploits to install it. You're just using the fact that you have access to your partner's phone and probably know their password to unlock their phone.
Wow. It's so people can spy on each other. Does it go into like you've a harassing spouse who is now technically equipped doing some kind of novel new forms of harassment, like making weird things appear on their phone and stuff like that? Is I'm just making that up. I have no idea.
I mean, I think it's more used, like one of the main aspects of abuse is about maintaining control, right? And controlling that person's life, right? Like that's why with abusers, a lot of like the pattern that we see is to like remove that, distance that person from their friends, distance that person from their family, distance that person from their support networks, right? And this is just more about like maintaining that control, right? Like making sure, like, the abusive partner making sure that they're not calling people that the abusive partner doesn't want them talking to, or sending messages, right, about the abusive partner. It's all about maintaining that control and it's, maintaining that, that abusive cycle, right? And it's really sick. It's a really sick industry, that thrives off of this. But it's pretty prevalent, unfortunately, right? There's a lot of it out there. And at first, for a long time, it wasn't being taken seriously at all, right? Like antivirus companies weren't even flagging it as malware until Eva and mostly Eva, honestly, until Eva started working on this, right? Like they weren't even flagging this as malware. They were like, well, we don't know what the deal is. We can't be sure, right? Maybe you wanted this installed on your phone, or maybe it's for your children, right? Like we can't even call this a potentially unwanted program or a pup, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is we're just not going to touch it, right? And we were like, no, this is malware. This is straight up malware. So now more antivirus companies flag on it, right? But that can create additional problems, right, for abuse victims. If you find the malware and uninstall it, right, like that might be a trigger for stepping up the abuse by your partner, right? So it's a scary situation. But we overall think that there is no legitimate reason for this industry to exist at all, right? And that the spouseware industry needs to be taken seriously by cybersecurity. It needs to be taken seriously by law enforcement. And moreover, it needs to go away.
So how much do you think the fact that we've basically normalized surveillance, how much does that hinder your work? Because people have accepted that our devices just follow us around and, oh, well, we have no privacy. Privacy is dead, or, whatever it is that people like to say, which is totally not true. How much does that get in the way when you're trying to get that message across of the danger of the most nefarious example of, the tracking that happened?
Yeah. I mean, privacy nihilism is a big problem, right? And it's a problem I faced throughout my career. From Privacy Badger to cell site simulators to state sponsored malware, right? It's and it comes in in two forms, I think, right? There's the like, yeah, right. We're already being spied on all the time anyway. So like, there's nothing I can do. Like, I might as well just give up and like allow the spying to happen. And the second form it comes in is like, well, I have nothing to hide. So I'm not worried about it, right? Like there's nothing there, I'm not doing anything. So sure, they can look at me all they want, right? And I think that both of these are wrong. And I try to push back against both of them, right?
Yeah.
And the way to push back against the first one is, which is like, well, there's nothing I can do, right? Which is, well, there are things you can do, right? There are steps that you can take to increase the amount of privacy you have, right? And it also, you need to take some time to think about what your threat model is and who you really need privacy from right now, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's if your threat model is your abusive spouse or your abusive parents, right? It doesn't really, it doesn't matter if Google is spying on you so much or Apple is spying on you so much as if your abuser is spying on you, right? And like you can there are steps you can take to stop that, right? If you're an activist in China, right? Let's say, like your threat model is not necessarily the NSA, right? Your threat model might be the Chinese government instead, right? So like using something like Gmail might be a better option for you because they have a large security team than using, a smaller open source email server that could be hacked easier, right? Like these are because you don't care about the NSA spying on you through by dint of Gmail, right? You care more about the CCP spying on you, through other means, right? So this is all like it's I encourage people to think about threat modeling in all these situations, right? And you're never going to get perfect, but there's a reason that we all lock our doors in our houses, right? And like locking your door does not guarantee that somebody isn't going to break into your house. Right. We all use a deadbolt, but somebody can break in through the window. Somebody can pick the deadbolt. Right. But it's all layers of security, right? Like you lock your doors and windows. Maybe you have an alarm system, right? You probably have a thing where you keep the lights on. Right. These are not, these are just layers of protection that you build up over time. And as you build up those layers of protection, it makes you a less attractive target. It makes your house a less attractive target. Right. And if you build up, and you can do the same thing on the internet, right? As you build up those layers of privacy, right? Using ad blockers, right? Using alternative search engines that don't, make their money by spying on you, right? Using open source applications instead of surveillance capitalist applications, right? You're building up your layers of protection there. And I think that that's what's important. And then the other form of privacy nihilism where like I have nothing to hide, so what should I worry about, right? Well, everybody has something to hide, right? Like that is, if you think you have nothing to hide, you are not thinking hard enough, right? Like think about
banking. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Like then, okay, give me all your passwords. Right.
Yeah.
Let me root around through your emails and your text messages and your Facebook posts from 2010.
Yeah. And can I borrow your credit card?
Yeah. Everybody has something to hide. Right. And people might say, well, yeah, of course, those things. But like, I'm not breaking any laws. Like I have nothing to hide, so I'm not breaking any laws. Oh, really? First of all, yes, you almost certainly are, because there are a billion there's a book of ridiculous federal laws that you are almost certainly breaking one, right? Also, like what is legal today might not be legal tomorrow, right? Like Supreme Court cases can upend everybody's lives really quickly. So
I do live in Texas, so
yes, so you understand. Yeah, so I would argue that everybody has something to hide, and everybody has stuff they want to protect, and you need to think about. And so I encourage people to do threat modeling and think about what their actual adversaries might be, what they actually want to hide, who they actually want to hide it from, and layer up their protections accordingly.
I want to go a bit deeper into threat modeling, and this, especially if I'm sitting around, I mean, how do I do my threat modeling? It's more like, how do I get to the grocery store? And very different thing. But also privacy nihilism. It's actually a term I hadn't heard before, and it really strikes me as deeper than we might think. And we'll do that after this break. Okay, so I'm thinking about you brought up a number of things already, and threat modeling for you and me, for ordinary folks, doesn't sound like something that most of us are thinking about, even though, and I think in some ways, lots of the topics that are in front of us right now are red herrings. They're false flags in a way, like AI is going to get me and stuff like that, like, and Google's following me, everybody's following me, and I don't like being followed. And you have no idea where the real threat is from, possibly for somebody who actually has a motive. I mean, Google's motive is to push ads at you, same with Facebook, and not much more than that, if anything. And I mean, I'm not saying it's entirely acceptable. It is relatively innocent compared to somebody who actually has a motive to come after you personally.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, so I'm looking at the Threat Lab site, and you've got a lot of news there. I'm wondering if you have something that says, for muggles that says, okay, here's
Idiot's Guide to Threat Modeling.
Yeah, the Idiot's Guide to Threat Modeling.
So I would never call people idiots.
Right.
I did love the For Dummies books when I was growing up. Right.
Yeah. The other one.
Yeah. But no, it's so first of all, we have our surveillance self-defense website, which is at ssd.eff.org. And that has many, many guides, and specifically one about threat modeling, which I think is really great. And I encourage everybody to go check that out. But a bit more about threat modeling. So threat modeling is actually a thing that we all do every day. And we maybe just don't realize it because we sometimes do it self-consciously, right? Every woman who has walked through a parking lot with her keys sticking out of her in between her fingers, right, is engaging in threat modeling, right? Actually, like, I think on the whole, women engage in threat modeling a lot more than men on a daily basis. But we all engage in threat modeling, right? When you lock your door, when you leave your house, you're engaging in threat modeling, right? You're saying, well, there's a threat that somebody will walk in my unlocked door, so I will lock it, and that will keep people from easily walking in my unlocked door. They'll have to break a window, which will make a lot of noise. They'll have to pick my lock, which requires certain skills, right? So you're doing some threat modeling there. You're saying, like, so you're saying, what are the threats that, the things I want to protect is the stuff inside my house. Who do I want to protect it from? Somebody who can, somebody who is going to break in, right? What am I willing to do? Well, I'm not willing to install unbreakable windows because that's expensive. Right. I'm not willing. I don't want to go find and research unpickable locks because that's expensive and takes time. I'm going to lock my door because that's going to stop 90% of what I need to stop. Right. And that's threat modeling. Right. Another example of threat modeling that you can think of is like having a house party. Right. And, let's say when you're a teenager, right, and your parents are gone for the weekend, you're trying to throw a house party. Right. What do you want to protect? Well, you want to make sure that your parents don't find out you're throwing a house party. You want to make sure that your house doesn't get trashed, right? You want to make sure that the cops don't get called, right? And you want to make sure that nobody gets hurt, right? And so you think, okay, what steps do I want to take to make sure this doesn't happen, right? Like, well, I'm going to wait and make sure my parents are definitely out of town. I'm going to, try to keep everybody inside the house so the neighbors don't notice, right? I'm going to make sure that nobody has any like allergies. And if they do, I'm not going to put out any foods with those allergies, right? I'm going to have a plan for if the police show up for everybody to run out the back door and scatter into the neighborhood, right? Things like that. And so those are like, that's another sort of form of threat modeling, right? Like you sort of want to plot in your mind, right? Like how likely something is, right? Is it likely that the neighbors will find out I'm having a party? yeah, that's fairly likely, right? And so like how many steps am I willing to go through, or, what sort of steps am I willing to go through to prevent that from happening, right? As opposed to like, okay, another threat could be aliens show up and crash my party, right? Like a UFO hovers over my house and they crash my party. That's pretty unlikely, right? And so you're not going to take a whole lot of steps to stop that from happening, right? Because that's not actually a very large concern, right? And then like, you can apply those same things to real life, right? Like, okay, I want to protect the contents of my emails, right? Do I want to protect the contents of my emails from scammers, right? Yeah, like that seems pretty likely, right? Do I want to protect the contents of my emails from, I don't know, NSA, cyber ninjas or whatever? Like, sure, yes. But also I'm going to have a much harder time protecting my emails from the NSA. And also, is the NSA really my main threat here, right? Like, unless you're, a foreign national, if you're in the US, I don't know, probably not, right? Like, it's probably your bigger threat is scammers, right? If you're engaging in, specific things, maybe you're more concerned about the NSA than scammers, right? And maybe you need to take different steps to protect your email further, against that high level of a threat, right? But I think for most people, you can think about what those threats are, right? Like, is my threat more that I will get bad information from a useless search engine, or is my threat more that the search engine I'm using will record all of my searches and those will be used in a law enforcement case later because I live in a state where abortion is now illegal, right? Like, these are real concerns, right? And in that case, that might be the same search engine because Google is getting more and more useless by the day. But that's an aside.
Wow. I'm wondering, this is a bit of a jump, but it was Mozilla that came out with this report on cars. And it turns out all of our cars, and this has been a known thing for years, it's just they went a little deeper on it. Every new car you buy has its own cell phone in it that the car company, that Ford or BMW or whoever bought and pay for, they are paying for a cell phone reporting on all kinds of things about you. And one of the things is like they could tell with motion sensors, I guess, they get accelerometers or something, whether people are having sex in a car, that kind of thing. I don't know which maker was behind that, but there's a kind of iron rule that says in tech that what can be done will be done until people freak out and make them stop. With the threat lab, are you looking into that as well? I mean, because it seems to me like if somebody's really motivated and could like, hey, wait a minute, I want to get into the ODB2 port here or do a parallel port out of that and suck information out of this car, find out where they've been, all that kind of stuff. Is that on your roadmap at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a concern, right? The car privacy thing is so bad. Mozilla's report was really like it was, like you said, right? It's kind of been known for years, but the extent to which they really revealed was just shocking, right? Like even for me, it was shocking, right? And then and of course I had just bought a brand new car, so now I'm like, oh god,
I'm keeping our old Subaru. We have a 2005 Subaru that knows nothing, and it's going to stay that way.
Yeah, the new car I bought has like, you can turn on the optional in-car Wi-Fi hotspot, and I'm like, if you pay us for it, right? And I'm like,
we'll give it to you free for 3 months, and then all of a sudden it goes useless.
Yeah. Oh, you'll share your cell connection with me, right? If I pay you for it, right? But you're gonna have it on anyway, and you're gonna use it to steal information from me. It is a big concern, but I'm less concerned in this case about like somebody breaking into the ODB2 port and siphoning the data than I am just about the general concern of data brokers, right? Like all of this data is going to data brokers en masse, right? And that's what's really concerning to me, right? We have this entire giant industry of data brokers, which is people that are just storing all of this data, right? Location data, browsing data, and all the stuff coming from Facebook, and all the stuff coming from your web browsing, social media, right? And I think it's a huge problem, right? And the reason that it's a really huge problem, right? It's not just it is bad for consumer privacy, but it's not just bad for consumer privacy, right? Because also law enforcement love to buy this data as a way to get around warrant requirements, right?
Yep.
If I want to get somebody's location history, right, that requires a serious warrant, right? Or the police officer, can just go buy that from one of these data brokers for a few bucks, right? And I can get all of the information I want. It's like it's this really wild, surveillance, like the sort of the logical end game of surveillance capitalism, right? Is and something we've been saying for years, right? Is that like all of this data that's being siphoned off by all of the trackers and ads and all of the apps on your mobile phone that have ad libraries that are collecting your location and all the time, right? All of that's going to end up in these big databases, and then that's going to be a perfect place for government surveillance to go next, right? And it turns out that that's true, right? You have lots of companies doing this, and you have companies even scraping social media sites for more data, right? There's this company Shadow Dragon there was recently a report about them in 404 Media, which is the new it's a new media outlet started by some former Vice journalists, including Joseph Cox, and they wrote about Shadow Dragon. Shadow Dragon is this company that provides open source intelligence feeds. And what they do is they scrape social media sites. They scrape Facebook, and they say they scrape WhatsApp. I'm not really sure how that works. They scrape Telegram and Twitter, and they even scrape some like mommy blogs and like parent forums and stuff like that. And they get all of this data and they put it into these feeds that law enforcement that can then subscribe to and put into tools like Maltego, which is like a graphing, like a social network graphing tool. And they can get these feeds and put them into Maltego to find out who's talking to who on social media, right? And get like all of this social media data to try to surveil people, right? Like who is this is a person of interest, so like who are their friend networks, right? What things are they discussing? What pages do they like, right? And you can and law enforcement could do all this before, but they would have to like go to Facebook, get a warrant for the data, right? Maybe the warrant gets rejected, right? Or well, so first of all, they have to go to a judge, get a warrant, right? And maybe the warrant gets rejected. If they do get a warrant, they got to go to Facebook, right? Ask for the data. Maybe it takes Facebook a while to do it, right? But now they can just go to this company, Shadow Dragon, or others like it, and say, hey, we would like a subscription to your Facebook data feed, right? And they're like, yeah, here you go, couple $1,000, right? And you're done. And now you, the law enforcement officer, don't have to get a warrant, don't have to do any of this. You can just access all of this data right away.
So go ahead, Katherine.
Oh, no, I was just thinking, it's kind of mind blowing. It's back in, when was it? 2015 or something? Back in our Linux journal days, we had a big article come out because some of our URLs came out in this big kind of expose. It was actually first published in Germany about the X key score program and all of this stuff. And basically that it was, if you had visited certain URLs on Linux Journal, which is the website I was responsible for at the time, you were flagged potentially for extra surveillance, and we made t-shirts. But as you do, because what else do you do? What else do you do when you find out you're potentially under surveillance by the NSA? Right.
And we were on a list of NSA sites that were
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
because we wrote about TOR and tails, but this is like so much worse than, this is like the as you say, the logical conclusion of surveillance capitalism. This is like the dystopian hell that I don't think we even envisioned in 2015.
Yeah. It's really wild, right? Like I spent years saying that like we're building these amazing tools for a fascist government, right? Like you might trust the government right now, but there might come a day when you don't trust the government, right? And we're building all of these tools that are amazing, surveillance panopticons, right? That you are not going to want in the hands of somebody that you consider an authoritarian, right? And now at this point, I think whatever side of the political spectrum you lean on, right? I think everybody is kind of like, oh yeah, I don't want those other people to have these tools, right? And yet we still keep building them.
Profitable.
Yeah.
And it turns out cool, and handy and convenient. So it's always a question of how much you're willing to trade, right?
Yeah, they are. I mean, look, I love social media, right? Like I really do. I think social media is great. I also hate social media, right? I think social media is terrible, but I think it's important, right? I think that I still believe in the promise of the internet to allow people to communicate over great distances and find their communities, right, that they wouldn't have otherwise found. And I'm really sad about where capitalism in general has taken the internet in these last decade or two, right? Like there used to be a million little forums and a million little blogs, right? And you could go to all of these sites, and now there are 5 major social media websites all sharing content from the other 4. Right. And like, that's like, you have, YouTube, TikTok reels being posted to YouTube, right? Twitter screenshots being posted to Facebook and Instagram, right? Instagram reels being posted to TikTok. And like, it's all, that's, and then you have WeChat, right? Which is kind of just out there standing on its own. But like, that's how it is now, right? You have these 5 walled gardens, which are controlled by the richest men on the planet, right? And nothing else. And I want to get back to and those platforms are getting worse and worse, right? As my colleague Cory Doctorow coined, the term my colleague Cory Doctorow coined is the shitification of the internet, right? They're just getting worse and worse. These platforms are getting worse and worse. And I want to go back to something like the old web, but better, right? Like I want to get away from surveillance capitalism and have people running, I want to get smaller, right? I want to get re-decentralized, right? So like, I'm really excited about Mastodon and Blue Sky for the ideas of decentralization there and open source, right? Like I love that those protocols are totally open. I think Blue Sky is doing really interesting things with like, open source content moderation, right? Like you can pick your own content moderation feeds, right? And you can pick your own like algorithms for what feeds show up on your front page, right? Like I'm really excited about Mastodon because, you can pick your own server, right? You can find your community and go join your own server. And if that server, gets bad, or if the admins are untrustworthy or whatever, you can leave and go to another server.
So I want to, you just gave us a great list of a whole bunch of things. So let's take a quick break and we'll get to those in a moment. Okay, so I have some questions about shitification now that we've cleared that Cory himself has uttered that here.
Yeah, I don't want to get an FCC violation.
Yeah, well, there's the FCC. It's a whole other, we can just shift that topic somewhere else. I'm wondering 2 things. One is, do we need the giants? And by that, I mean, there are certain things only giants could do. And I mean this in a general way. I mean, only a certain kind of giant, because I'm looking at a cruise ship out there, can build a cruise ship. You need a pretty big company to build a cruise ship and probably to operate a cruise line. But there is actually competition in that. And so that's not a good analog. But, you see, we have these five giants and they've all in their own different ways gone bad. I mean, the only one that probably hasn't in a very conditional way is maybe Apple, but if Corey was here and say, no, Apple's doing yada, 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 yada. So, but what they're doing with Blue Sky, for example, I mean, this is, what's his name? I'm blocking right now. Who used to run Twitter, and he's basically it's Twitter 3.0 basically.
He's not super involved with it actually. Like he's on the board, but I think he's pretty hands off with their day to day.
So I mean, to me, the problem with Blue Sky, but I use it, and same with Mastodon. I go there every once in a while. Not much happens, and I don't bother. And then I've gone back to Blue Sky a few times because there's a small cabal of people that I know that are there. But for the most part, as a journalist, I'm really not interested in the social stuff at all there. I'm interested in what's news, right? And like we had a tornado warning in Bloomington, Indiana, where I mostly live now these days. And we went into our basement, which is my office, and there were sirens going off. We were notified by our phones. I tune in all the radio stations that are local. There's nothing. And I go on Twitter, and there's all kinds of stuff from local residents about what they've seen and what they haven't seen. And it clearly, Musk doesn't want it to be what it was. He wants it to be something else. Yeah. It's an accessory to his other properties, and it's going to get integrated with the other properties. It's probably going to be his master property. It's going to be his meta, I think.
Well, yeah, he's been trying to make an app called X that does everything for
he wants
his
it to be
entire career
app,
now, right?
And he's willing to just take just leave the social part of that being kind of a giant loss leader for him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it's enshittified, and I'm wondering whether or not, like, let's say Blue Sky gets huge. Is it going to be enshittified? It seemed to me that actually Dorsey and others of all of the social networks did a better job with Twitter than the others. I mean, they actually had pretty aggressive content moderation where they're trying to keep the bad stuff off and so on. So we just sort of two parts to this. One is inevitably, are we going to have giants, and how do we use them best, and fight their worst and that kind of stuff. And the other is, can we really ultimately go back to the web we had? Because I love that web. I loved Web 1.0. I loved having a server under my desk. I loved having my own IP addresses in my house. We had a server called Happy that lived under my desk, and that was one that had its own IP address. And everything I wrote for Linux Journal, there would be a cron job that pushed it overnight. And it was great. And we only had under 100 kilobits of connectivity at the time. It was in the late 90s. But it worked, and it was mine. And I had my own email server. It was right there. Now that email server did end up getting inhabited by a porn thing at some point. So I gave up on that. Right. So, But can we drive? I mean, it's kind of like you go on the road in your car, ignoring for now this plain fact that you're being spied on in your car and you're driven as much as they're driving your car. But you have a sense of autonomy and control when you're in your car and you're on the road, right? And we ought to have that on the net. And it's kind of a false sense because I've got my phone and it's in my pocket as an extension of myself, that it's me and not just something I'm hiring from Apple or Google. So what do you see? Where do you see this going?
I mean, so first of all, let me say, I think I don't want to go back to the old internet, right? Because I think that we tend to have rose-colored glasses, and I do this too, right? About how great the old internet was. There were a lot of things that were a lot better than than they are now, right? Like I said, there were a million weird little blogs and forums, right? There were also Usenet flame wars, right? There was also rotten.com, right? Like there was, I feel like, 4chan and all the other chans are kind of one of the things to come out of the old internet, right? Like, which, I would have a hard time arguing the benefits of 4chan to society, right? But that said, I think that we can build a new internet the old internet also didn't have any encryption, right? Like nobody was using HTTPS, right? It was rife for government spying, right? So I think we can build a new internet that's even better. And I don't think we need giants to do it, right? Like I actually think that these giant companies often hold back progress, right? Like a lot of their progress is already built on the shoulders of many open source developers, right? To tie this to the theme of the show, right? There's that XKCD cartoon, right? Yeah. That's like, the entire tech stack, right? And it's all resting on the, one guy who develops OpenSSL in his basement, right? For the last 20 years unpaid, right? Which we all found out the hard way in somewhere in the 2010s. I think that I'm a firm believer in collective action, right? And I think that collectively we can do way more amazing things, especially when we're doing those things for the good of our society and for the good of everybody, than with the motive of making the most profit that we possibly can, right? So, I think that, and what you're saying about, I go on Blue Sky, I go on Mastodon, right? And there's just like not that much there yet, right? Like a lot of the interesting content is still on other platforms, right? It's still on, TikTok, and it's still on Twitter to an ever decreasing degree, right?
Yeah.
But that is true. Right. And that is because of network effects, right? That's because, everybody's there. So everybody stays there. Right. Like that's where the interesting things are going on. So that's where you want to post your interesting content so that people will see it. Right. But we have to remember that those companies didn't always have the networks that they do either. Right. Twitter used to have, a bunch of tech weirdos on it and nobody else. Right. And then Black Twitter got on, and, queer Twitter got on. Right. And all these other interesting Twitter subcultures got on. And then journalists got on. Right. And that's what made Twitter really, become what it was in its heyday. Right. You had the same thing with Facebook. Right. At first, it was a sort of hot or not app for Harvard students. Right. And then it was an exclusively social network for college students. Right. And then they kind of opened it up more. Right. And suddenly, everybody got on, and it's the hottest place for your aunt and uncle to share the most deranged memes that they have. Right. And poison their brains. But like, for example, the youth, like, Gen Z or whatever, which is a marketing term, but Gen Z aren't on Facebook at all, right? They don't care about Facebook one bit, right? They're all on YouTube and on TikTok, right? So like, if you're, if the network effects can change, right? And I think that like, if we want to see a better internet, right? Like we need to stop feeding these giants, right? And start bringing our good content to the places that we actually like, right? We need to sort of, vote with our feet or vote with our dollar, right? And like start posting our good content to Mastodon or to Blue Sky or to places that reflect our values.
I actually find that I find a lot of useful information on Mastodon. You just, again, it's the network effect, but you just kind of have to seek it out. But once you've kind of built that, thing that you've personally curated for yourself, and it starts to just work, and it's pretty great, honestly.
It's going to take a while. Yeah, I agree with you. Katherine. And I think it's going to take a while, right? It's certainly going to take a while to get like people who aren't extremely online to start using Mastodon, right? Because there's a learning curve, right? Like Mastodon is the Linux kernel of social media, right? Yes. Like it's, I'm as people who formerly worked at Linux Journal, right? I'm still waiting for the year of Linux on the desktop, right?
It happened. We just carry it around.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It turns out it was
proprietary-ified.
Turns out it was the year of Linux in your pocket, and yeah, exactly. But yeah, I do worry that that's how Mastodon will go, but I don't want it to go that way, right? And I think a lot of us don't want it to go that way, and I think it's going to take some unlearning of these patterns, right? Like, well, you go to the social media site and you sign up for an account, and there you are, right? And we're going to have to teach our friends who are less technically inclined, like, why this is important, why this is good, why this is better, right? And like, yeah, I don't know, you got to decide what server is right for you. Why don't you come get on my server and you can hang out there for a while and see what you like and what you don't like, right? And then you can, move on if you want, right? But we're going to have to, I think that those of us who are into this, right, those of us who are more technically inclined, those of us who are want to push for this, are going to have to hold people's hands a little bit, right? Like, get your non-technical colleagues on, right? Get your journalist colleagues on, right? Get your activists, your friends who are doing really interesting stuff, but don't want to learn another new social media thing, right? Like, help them figure it out. And I think that that's how we build a better world, right? It's slow work, it's hard work. But I think we can do it. I think we all can keep pushing for it, and the tech giants will continue to, weave their own ropes with which to hang themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to put it. But yeah, it's I like to. So we've talked a lot of kind of scary things. We've talked about spouse stalkerware and stuff, and I guess in a way I see that the sort of decentralized social media is being actually maybe a small part of a solution, but I wondered if you could talk about a little bit about other kind of mitigation efforts for all, basically anything we've talked about, up to this point. What's the other side of it? Where what do we have to be optimistic about? What tools do we have to empower ourselves?
Yeah, great question. So I'm. Oh, sorry. I'm like I said, I'm really excited about all of these sorts of things. Of course, I am a big fan of ad blockers and tracker blockers. Things like Privacy Badger, which I worked on. I think that a lot of people use uBlock Origin. That's a good one too. I think they work really great together to combat different threats. Right. Another thing to be excited about is that we have encrypted almost all web traffic, right? Like when I started at EFF, I think something like 20% of web traffic was encrypted, right? Like almost nothing used HTTPS by default. Now it's something like 90%. I think everything uses HTTPS by default. Like you would have to try to go find an unencrypted website in this day, right? And that is a huge win. That makes Dragnet surveillance so much harder, right? Also, billions of people are using end-to-end encrypted messaging every day, often without even realizing it, right? WhatsApp has billions of users. Signal is a fantastic application that's being used by tons and tons, millions and millions of people, right? And I am very excited about that, right? Like, overnight, pretty much, right? All of our, we went from everybody sending unencrypted plain text SMS messages or AIM messages or whatever, right? To now everybody using end-to-end encryption, or most people using end-to-end encryption by default, right? And that's really great. So I'm really excited about, I love Signal a lot. I think everybody should use it. But whatever platform your people are on, right? As long as it's Signal, WhatsApp, or to a certain degree iMessage, right? Like, yeah, you're using encrypted messaging, right? And I think that that's really great, and I'm really excited for that. I think that's and I think partially why we're seeing this rise of more kind of targeted state-sponsored malware going against activists is because we've done such a good job of encrypting the web, right? Like dragnet surveillance is so much harder now, right? You can't be the NSA and just slurp up all of the data that everybody's sending across the web unencrypted, right? You can't slurp up all of the SMS messages and text messages that everybody's sending unencrypted. So, I think governments are starting to turn toward more targeted things, which are more expensive, right? And they're not dragnet, so you can't target as many people. And they're just harder to do, right? They're technically a lot more difficult. So I'm, than just tapping the fiber line going out of your country, right? So I'm really excited about this. I think that this is actually a good sign that we're having that we're seeing this rise in state-sponsored spyware, because it means that the encryption is working.
So I want to get a little further into tracking protection and especially privacy badger, uBlock Origin, stuff like that, right after this break. So Cooper, you worked on Privacy Badger. I have Privacy Badger on here. I have other tracking protection as well. I've had uBlock Origin and have it on and off. I've used a lot of them on and off. How do they work together? You mentioned earlier that those two in particular work well together. What is one doing that the other one is not? And can they defeat each other? Is it a matter of putting more filters in front of something, or can they conflict in some way? I don't have a sense of that.
First of all, the main caveat is that I do not work on Privacy Badger anymore and have not worked on it for many years. It is now being worked on by two of my excellent colleagues who do a fantastic job on it. So like one example is uBlock Origin has some really great blocking lists, right? For a lot of first party advertisements, for a lot of first party trackers and things like that, right? That Privacy Badger doesn't catch, because Privacy Badger is mainly concerned with blocking third party trackers. That is like a site other than the site that you're visiting wants to set a cookie and kind of follow you around on the internet, right? Things like Facebook, Google, or DoubleClick are sort of the big ones there, right? But Privacy Badger also catches some things that uBlock Origin doesn't, right? So like I think they each kind of there's a big overlap, but they also each catch some things that the other one doesn't. Privacy Badger now also has the latest feature that we've just released on Privacy Badger is stopping Google's link tracking. So when you click a link when you do a Google search and you click a link, the link doesn't actually go to that website. It first goes to Google so that Google can make a record that you clicked that link and know where you're going, and then it redirects to that site. And so the new feature of Privacy Badger is removing that, so that when you click that link, it actually just goes straight to the website that you're trying to go to, instead of this sort of Google intermediary first.
And to do that with other things. I mean, one of the things that for example, with Substack, and Katherine and I have a newsletter on Substack. By default, every link is not like a real link. It's one of their intermediary links. So they can, the innocent side of it is, well, you can see how many people clicked on this particular link and stuff like that, but also it can get personal. Yeah. Can these tools look through to the end point, like you just said, and just say, we're going to go straight there and ignore this? Or
I think it's probably on the roadmap to expand that to other sites. Right now we're doing it with Google, because Google is probably the biggest one that everybody uses every day, right? And I think it's pretty specific to how Google does it, but I can't really speak to the roadmap of the Privacy Badger developers, but it's definitely something that happens on a lot of websites, right? And actually, speaking of things that I'm excited about, there's this update. I think Apple mentioned that in iMessage now they're going to start stripping the tracking tracking IDs from URLs that you share within iMessage. So if you share a a link to a Twitter post, right? And it has that like, and T equals, a long hexadecimal string at the end, right? To show exactly who you are. They're going to now be stripping that off the end of the link in iMessage, which I think is great, right? Like they're going to be actively foiling some aspects of surveillance of surveillance of tracking, right? Which I think is great, and that's something I would love to see more, end-to-end encrypted messengers do, right? Like I think that'd be a really great thing for WhatsApp and for Signal to start doing. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think that tracking protection and ad blockers are super important, and I think that they're only getting more and more important as we see. Like, at first it was kind of like, oh, these are, you're taking money away from the websites, which, to a degree you are. But also like, but the ads are annoying, right? Like the ads are obtrusive, right? I don't want to see those. And it's still true that they're annoying and obtrusive, but they're also a security issue, right? Like we're seeing malvertising, malware being pushed through ads, right? We're seeing, ads used. We're seeing the data collected from ads and from trackers used by law enforcement, used by data brokers, right? So like, and, also, things like crypto miners, right? Being pushed through ads on websites, right? And just like generally slowing down the website, slowing down your computer, right? So I think that ad blockers and tracker blockers are becoming more and more important, right? Like they're not just to, make your web browsing experience less annoying. They're actually an important security tool.
So go ahead.
What about speaking of mitigation and stuff, what about removing your data from data brokers? So we talk about data brokers, and there are a lot of reasons, again, not to get political, but regardless of what side you're on, you probably don't want people to have certain information about you, right? Especially today. And maybe your health data, for example. Are there really effective ways of getting of removing any of that data? I mean, I know of some, but I just wonder how effective it is really.
Yeah. So unfortunately, in the US, it depends on what state you live in, right? If you live in a state with a fairly strong privacy law like California, right? You can, you're protected by CalECPA, and you can ask, for a copy of your data from the data broker. I think you can ask, I'm pretty sure you can ask for your data to be deleted, right? And you can do all these things. If you live in a state without a strong privacy law, though, unfortunately, you can't do any of that, right? And so we really, really, really need a federal privacy law, right? Something at least as strong as the California privacy law, if not even stronger, right? But that is super important. And we need a federal ban on law enforcement using data from data brokers without a warrant, right? Like these are, I think, two super important things that would be, I'm not generally a large fan of, waiting for the state to do things because states take far too long to do things and typically, and they'll usually do them wrong. But this is something that we desperately, desperately need. So I'm a big fan of pushing for federal privacy regulations.
Yeah. And awareness.
And awareness, right? But like, I mean, if you're in California, go to the Experian website and request a copy of your data, because the amount of data that Experian, one of the big three credit providers, has about you is absolutely nuts, right? Like it is, they have it, it says like whether, so I requested mine. There's a field about like whether I take the bus very often, whether I live in a high risk neighborhood, right? If I live close to a grocery store or convenience stores, right? Like if I have, if I'm friends with high risk people, right? Like the people get really worried about the Chinese social credit system, right? Like, and I'm telling you, it's already here, right? Like it just looks different, right? But like Experian has all this data, right? The data brokers have all that data already. And you can be certain that some algorithm is out there making decisions about you based on that data.
So we are very close to the end of the show. So, and I'm looking at the list that you gave us, and of the things we haven't talked about yet: biometric privacy for VRXR AR, the tech hype grift cycle, the TOR University Challenge, IMSI catchers, e-carceration. That's an interesting one. Is there any one of those you want to visit in like a minute before we go?
Yeah, I'd be remiss not to plug the TOR University Challenge, because this is a project that I'm working on right now. So so EFF, along with the TOR project, are trying to get more universities, schools, high schools, even institutions, junior colleges, whatever, to run TOR nodes. This will help the TOR network grow. It'll help the TOR network have better speeds, because if there's more long-term, universities and colleges and schools tend to have good internet connections, right? It also, thank you. You pulled up the site there. It also makes the TOR net, it helps legitimize the TOR network, right? And it makes other countries less likely to censor it, because countries rely on academic collaboration, right? And having their institutions be able to talk to one another. So we can really help the TOR network by having more universities set up these relays. So if you are a professor at a university, if you're a student at a university, if you work at a high school or a college, a junior college, whatever, and you want to set up a TOR relay, please check out torchallenge.eff.org. And we have some advice there on how you can go set up a relay at your school and keep it running. And if you keep it running for a year, we will send you a fantastic challenge coin. See if I can.
That's
I don't know if I can get it to focus. It's got these 3 cute little onions on the back.
Well, most people are listening anyway. So.
Oh, right. This is not a visual medium, the podcast. Yes,
it is. It is, and it isn't.
It is, and it isn't. But it mostly isn't.
But yeah, we'll send you a beautiful challenge coin for everybody involved in the process, and we'll list your school on the front page of the website if you want. And you'll of course have our undying thanks and the good feeling of knowing that you're helping support the TOR network. So please check out torchallenge.eff.org. Okay,
so we always close the show with the 2 quick questions. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Vim and Python.
Wow, that was by far the quickest answer we've ever had.
Love that. Love that. Easy answers for me.
Well, is it Bash? Or maybe I have to think. Let me look over here. It's like, but very good. Listen, we have so many turns on stone there that we are going to have you back soon.
Yes,
this is really great. And send your buddies from Privacy Badger, anybody toward us. We always need more guests. We'll never run out. This is our 752nd show, I think. So,
wow.
Yeah, we've been at this for a while.
Well, it's an honor to be on here, and thank you for the many years of Linux Journal, which are definitely a big part of what helped me in my career and got me to where I am today. So,
thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. That's pretty fantastic.
That is fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, I was a huge fan of Linux Journal. Always bought the copy when I would find it in Borders or Barnes and Noble or whatever stupid.
Yeah, when those existed too.
Back when bookstores and physical magazines still existed.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Cooper. This is great, and we'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
So, Katherine,
is this the post show part? Yeah. Okay.
This is We're at the post part, but not the part after the part.
I can never remember.
I know, it's always good.
That was fantastic. That was everything and more. I would love to have more of these. This is just nerd out, cover all the topics.
You don't know, Cooper. Your mic just got muted sort of automatically but don't go away.
Don't go away. Yeah, stay there.
Don't go away. This is a point where Katherine and I get into plugs and stuff. Anyway, so Katherine, we didn't begin to cover everything on that. I was expecting a lot was even better. I'm sure glad you ran into him at
I know.
DEF CON.
You never know who you might run into at DEF CON. That's good stuff. Yeah, plugs though. I think that's what you're about to ask. So I'll just go ahead and try and answer. So what you mentioned, we occasionally publish a newsletter and we also do a podcast over at Reality 2.0. A new one I think just went up today. So that's a thing. And then I also, I do an Open at Intel podcast because I am an open source evangelist over at Intel. And I hope if you really love the sound of my voice, especially with my new Elvis microphone, you can hear me in multiple places.
Yes, I want to say that this last show that we did was with, is that the one with Michael Stolarczyk?
It is, yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting because he's a guru in the shipping industry. And so all of those giant unidentified, these things that are as big as 4 Costco's that are near airports and alongside highways everywhere, these are called flow centers. They're not warehouses at all because everything moves through those things. And it's really interesting. There's not much of an open source story there, but there is a weird generosity story there that I had not expected. So it's a good show. It's a good one.
Yeah. Yep.
So, so next week, who do we have next week? that I'm not prepared with yet. Okay, here we go. Down here to schedule and roll it down. Okay. Errol Balkan. Okay, great.
That'll be a good one.
Errol, Errol is a hardcore geek, old school, though he's a young guy, big into design. He's at the Small Technology Foundation. Last I saw him was actually in London. Very interesting dude. And so he's coming up next week, and I highly recommend that one. We have Mad Dog Hall coming in the week after that, and so I'm looking down the list here. So I'm trying to get ahead of things. So awesome. Those are coming up, and so we'll see you next week.
It's midweek, and you really want to know even more about the world of technology.
So you should check out Tech News Weekly, the show where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news.
It's the biggest news. We talk with the people writing the stories that you're probably reading. We also talk between ourselves about the stories that are getting us even more excited about tech news this week.
So if you're excited, well, then join us. Head to twit.tv/TNW to subscribe.